welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. I am Jessica. I'm your host today, and I am here with the author Delia Pitts, who is here to chat about Death of an Ex, which is her second book in the mystery series surrounding Vandy Myrick, who is private detective. She's got a lot behind her in her own life, and she's very much put in the middle of the scene in this book for very personal reasons. So she's solving a mystery, but as one might assume by the title of the book, Death of an Ex, it is the death of somebody very close to her. So Delia, first of all, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you so much, Jessica, for having me. I'm really happy to be here with you.
I'm really happy to have you. And I would love for you to just tell us a little bit about yourself. I know that this is the second book in Vandy's series, but you have other books and other series that you're writing. So yeah, why don't you tell our audience a little bit about you and how you became a writer to begin with?
Sure, yes. I'm glad to jump in and go as far back as you'd like. First of all, I'm from Chicago. I'm born and raised, and I went to the University of Chicago for my graduate degree. I went to Oberlin for my undergraduate degree. My graduate degree is a doctorate in African history. And from that, I went into a couple of careers that really built on that academic base. I served for 11 years as a foreign service officer, that is a U.S. diplomat. I worked along with my husband, who also was a career diplomat. We served in embassies in Nigeria, in Mexico City, and we also served in various posts in Washington, D.C. I was really happy that I got to serve on the cultural side of our diplomacy efforts. So I found myself most of the time working with journalists and writers and artists and librarians and filmmakers and having a blast in all the countries where I served as a representative of the United States. So it was a fantastic opportunity for me. I then went took a different angle on a career, and I leaned into my academic side, and I went back to university work, and I worked for many years as a higher education administrator. So I worked first in Texas as a director of international student affairs and helped recruit international students, worked on our intensive English program, our study abroad programs, our exchange programs. It was a fabulous opportunity to put both sides of what I knew, my academic side and my international side. I went from Texas to New Jersey, where I am right now, and worked for almost 20 years in universities here in New Jersey, again in higher education, in a variety of different capacities. All the time, I was interested in and have always loved detective fiction. People often ask me, well, how did you get started in this? And I say that I remember as a very small child in Chicago, I don't know where my parents were, but I was up late at night, even when I was 8 and 10 years old, watching old movies on late at night on television and falling in love with all of the rather hard-bitten, hard-boiled private eyes and detectives that you would see, Alan Ladd and Humphrey Bogart, and all of that kind of movie really intrigued me. And I also spent most of my childhood and adulthood reading detective fiction, reading crime fiction. Everything from what you might say the traditional golden age of British crime writers, Dorothy L. Sayers, Agatha Christie for sure, loved and still love Sherlock Holmes and Arthur Conan Doyle's incredible creation, but also Nao Marsh and a number of other, Josephine Tay, a number of others from the British tradition of crime fiction. And it was a little bit late. That was even in middle school, high school, that I was reading all of those classics. And then it wasn't until a bit later that I got into the American response to the British golden age. And I started reading Raymond Chandler and learning about his contributions and also figuring out what it was that the Americans had contributed to that genre that I always loved consistently. So I finally, after all that career stuff in international affairs and in university administration, I decided to go back to one of my earliest loves, which was writing. And I should add that I always say to people, my mother was a professional librarian. My father was a clinical psychologist. And so, I don't think I really had an option but to become a writer of crime fiction. It was in the upbringing. It was where I started and where I ended up. So I think that those are the elements in my background that led me to taking up writing crime fiction. As you mentioned, this is not my first series. The Vandy Myrick series is the second series of private eye fiction that I have written. I wrote an earlier series that was set in Harlem, also contemporary, also featuring a Black private investigator. That time it was a male private investigator whose last name was Rook. And had a great deal of fun. 6 books there in that series. They're still available, and urge everybody to go read them. They were a lot of fun. I really, really enjoyed it. And somebody asked me the other day, you seem like you loved Rook. And I said, there's a thing. I did love Rook. I still do. I feel drawn back to him. Who knows where I'll go next with my writing. But working at that point with a private detective who challenged many of the tropes of private eye fiction. That's something that really motivated a lot of all of my writing, really, was taking some of those classic tropes. I've mentioned some of the sources, that is film, novels, short stories, where I drew my inspiration from. But then I wanted to mix it up. I wanted to shake it up. I wanted to look at some of those tropes and say, well, how can we twist them to better serve the things that I find interesting, the things that reflect community interests, community concerns, contemporary values, contemporary issues. And so I had a great deal of fun playing around with some of the conventions that we saw established in all those great American and British stories, and then developed, as I say, the first series set in Harlem, the Ross Agency Mystery Series, as it was called, and then this current 2-book series, soon to be a 3rd book, I can reveal happily, series that is set in central New Jersey, which is where I live now.
Yeah, I was going to say, so first of all, wow. Wow. That's amazing. All of that is absolutely amazing. And what's cool is you could kind of tell like you had a passion for the things you were doing, but all the while this was always there in your mind. Yeah, so the story, yeah, it is set where you are now. And Vandy's a really interesting protagonist. She has, as of this book, she has lost her daughter, Monica. She's also grieving her father in real time, who she's named for, which I thought was very cool that both she and her father are Evander, which is where Vandy's name comes from. And you learn just a lot more about her through how you talk about, Phil, who's her ex, who is the one who dies. And that's not a spoiler. If you read the back of the book, you know that he dies. it's such an interesting setup in general because you have so much going on. You have Vandy sort of, like I said, mourning and coming to terms with Monica's death and, still dealing with the fact that her father is alive but not mentally there. And then Phil, who you get a little sense of who he was in her life and what type of person he was in the beginning. And obviously, as the story goes on, you get other senses of him. But the way that Vandy has to investigate because of how close the relationship is, you get, some of that small town suburban drama as well. Um, when you wrote the first book and you came to this one, how did you did you know that Phil was going to be the victim in the second book, as you were wrapping up the first one?
Yes, that's a really good question. And in fact, I did. I knew he would be in the second one. In fact, one of the things I wrestled with, I wouldn't say was the biggest thing I wrestled with, but certainly something I wrestled with in the first book, Trouble in Queenstown, was what was I going to name Vandy's ex-husband? I knew, obviously, that I knew that she had an ex-husband, and I decided early, I think he's mentioned in passing within the first 20, 30 pages of the first book, Trouble in Queenstown. And at that point, I struggled long and hard with the name because I said, I'm going to have to live with this name. I'm going to live with this name, not in this first book, because as I said, I think he was mentioned maybe once or at most twice. And then he's not a part of that story. But I knew I needed a name that I was willing to live with and die with in book 2. So I changed his name a few times before we got to publication of book 1 because I wanted it to be right. I wanted it to be something that I could feel comfortable with as a writer, using as the name that would represent this very important person in Vandy's life. So yes, that was something I had from the beginning. I knew that one of the issues, as you mentioned, is that is ongoing for Vandy is how does one deal with grief, the different kinds of grief. We find her grieving for her dead daughter, her daughter who's died in a tragic accident as a very young college student. And it then poses for Vandy the question, am I still a parent if I don't have a child? And what does that mean? How do I deal with other parents that I know and work with? How do I deal with other young people and her relationships with younger people who are more or less the counterparts and cohort of her dead daughter, Monica, are extremely important to Vandy as she, I don't say you work your way out of grief, but you work to different levels of grief and different approaches to the role that grief plays in your life. And the young people, teenagers and young adults that she meets and works with and defends and challenges along the course of the story are very important. And they're important because precisely she herself has lost a child. The other loss that you mentioned, the grief, is over the loss of her father, a different kind of loss. He suffers from Alzheimer's, and he is in an assisted facility for mental health care. And he is a very enigmatic. He's another figure that from the beginning of the first book, I knew was going to play perhaps a larger role than one might imagine. You would think, well, okay, this is a very elderly man. He's a retired police officer. He's the one that sort of got Vandy on the course toward law enforcement in the first place. And so she takes a lot from him. She is like him in many, many ways. And she knows that. She sees that. One of the character arcs that I wanted to follow for Vandy in book 2 was her getting to know and think more about her mother. Her mother is also dead, had died several years before her daughter's death. And Vandy has always actually felt a little estranged from her mother. And so one of the things we follow through book 2 is Vandy learning more about her mother. Late, perhaps, but it's never too late. And she learns a lot about her mother's character, the people her mother interacted with, how her mother herself was a protector in some key ways in their little small town community. And so what Vandy does through the course of investigating the crime in Death of an Ex is find out a lot about obviously herself, but also about the people that form her family. And that to me was a very interesting and important arc to develop through this very challenging and layered character.
Yeah, I was wondering myself a little bit about that because there is a lot about family in in the book, and she learns a lot about her mother and about her ex-husband too.
Of course.
There is a plot point that I'm not sure if it's mentioned in the back of the book. Now I can't remember. But I think it is. So I'm just going to come out and say it that her ex-husband has another child.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the central focus point of a lot of, the story because Tariq reminds Vandy both of Phil, who is a complex character and she has complex feelings about, even though he's also kind of murky in moral, I suppose one can say.
Yes.
Yeah, and Monica as well. There's he's like this central focal point, and a lot of the emotion comes from that as well. So it's like she's going backwards and going forwards at the same time, and it makes
Yes.
for a really interesting journey.
I think you've hit it right on the head. I think there's exploration forward. That is, there is a current crime. Phil is dead. It's not, as you say, it's in the title. So you're only surprised if you don't remember the title of the book when he turns up dead. But of course, you don't know, and neither does Vandy, how he died and why, who might be responsible for this. And Vandy takes it upon herself to, as still a member of his family in a way, even maybe as an adjunct, but she's still a member of his family, and she takes it upon herself that he's her client. And so for the majority of the book, she is pursuing different angles to find out who might have done him in, who might have done him harm, who might have wished him harm. And given the complexities of Phil's character, he's a very messy, charismatic figure, very alluring to a number of people. He's a powerful businessman. He's a philanthropist. He's
Extremely handsome.
He's extremely handsome.
He's got like plus a million charisma is what us nerds would say about him.
Right. Well, I always thought to myself, I said, Phil, and I didn't think of this before him, but Phil was a good name because Phil works both as philanthropy Phil, which is what he is. He's a big time donor to a number of different very good causes. He's also a philandering Phil. And so the name Phil works in all those ways. He is as complicated and alluring as one could imagine. I hope, and I think it's clear why Vandy was attracted to him especially as a very young woman. She met him in college, and they got married at that point. So their marriage is more than 20 years over by the time we come to this story, but still very much. She says he's the love of her life, and she feels that draw very strongly. First when he's merely a ghost, a memory in her past, and then when he comes bounding back into her life as a very real present figure, and then when he's dead. So he's very strongly present. She married him over the objections of her parents, who I think I have her father say he was a snake in tight pants. And that sort of captures him. He's dangerous, but very alluring.
Oh yeah, and that becomes apparent just throughout the entire story. It really does hit a lot of buttons I think people are gonna like. The mystery is very good. Like I said, if you are a fan of sort of like domestic mystery, it's got a little bit of that, some small town suburban mystery,
Mm-hmm.
some family drama, and Vanty's just a really good protagonist. She's very smart. She's funny at times.
Mm-hmm.
I really enjoyed following her and just living in her head, listening to how
Yes.
her thought process went.
Yes, thank
Um,
you for saying that she's funny,
she's
because
very
I feel
funny.
she is funny.
She
And
is
I'm glad
funny.
when people pick up on that. She has a level of sarcasm that she lets it fly a little more than I typically do. I must say, I was wanting to mention, she is, I wouldn't say completely based on a single person, but I took my inspiration from my own family. Myricks actually is a family name on my father's side of the family. And particularly, I took my inspiration from a cousin who is older than I am, still very much alive, Esther Myrick, lives in Chicago and is very vigorous and very outgoing, even well into her 80s now. But when I was growing up, Esther and her husband formed a small security firm, small security company on the south side of Chicago. And Esther and her husband ran this little security agency. I wouldn't say that it was a detective agency that focused on the major crimes like kidnapping and murder that we find in classic crime fiction, but she did operate. She did have operatives who provided security in the local community. They did things like insurance fraud investigation and job application investigation and property security and personal security. For me, Esther was very much of a role model. She was someone who, in the 1960s, this was not that usual for a younger Black woman to set up a firm, a security firm, a detective agency in Chicago, and to run it as a successful business for many years. And so it always struck me, it always stayed in my mind that this is something that women can do, that Black women can do. And so it's not an accident, therefore, that I named my character, Vandy Myrick, after my cousin, Esther Myrick. Esther is tiny. She's not violent in any way. She's very funny. She's very stylish. She's still sexy. And so she brings a lot of those qualities to the Vandy that I created for this. Vandy's not the same as Esther in many ways. Esther is not a police officer or an ex-police officer. She doesn't know how to use, to my knowledge, she doesn't know how to use guns, and she's not a boxer either. But I just wanted to mention that was an important source, and clearly in the name, my choice of name, and also the choice of career and drive came from my cousin Esther.
I think that that's lovely, and it's great because she really is just this full character. And as I said before, I could tell you really enjoy spending time with her.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And it's important, to mention this is in the classic tradition, this is a first person narrative. This is told from this point of view of I, and the I is Vandy. And that's a classic of this genre. And I wanted to make full use of that. So we're very much on her shoulder, if not inside her head and her heart, throughout the entire investigation. And that, I think, makes for a lot of drama. It makes for a lot of fun. It gives you a real good, I think, sense of the town and the environment that she lives in, the place, and how it affects her professional life as well as her personal life. She's very aware of, she can't be otherwise, of being a Black professional woman in a small town where it's not never seen, but it's unusual in the town. Her boss is also an African American woman, as is her assistant. One of the things I wanted to break away from of the tropes is the private eye as an absolute loner. And I wanted, therefore, to twist that a bit and place Vandy in a circle of professional women, as well as a circle of friends. So she has people that she relies on. I've mentioned the two, her boss and her admin assistant, who provide a lot of really important emotional support to her in this grieving process, but also in the professional process of doing investigations. And then the fourth member of their little circle is her bartender, who is an important other woman, a little bit older than Vandy, and a semi-substitute mother figure in a way, although she's got her own very lively social life that Vandy discovers more about as the book goes on. So Mavis the bartender is another part of that circle of support and revival that Vandy takes to heart as she is pulling herself out of the depths of the grief that we encounter her in to begin with.
It really makes for a lovely story. My last question that I want to ask you is, do you know who done it before you start writing the books? Like, did you know who done it here specifically and just in general?
Yes, I know how the book is going to end. I have a sense, what the climactic scenes are, and I have a very clear image of what those scenes are in my mind. I know who did it. I don't know all of the steps that we or Vandy are going to take to get to that last scene. But yes, I know, and therefore then I can seed, I hope, some clues, some misdirection. But I like being fair with the reader. I think it makes for a better book. And I always hope that people read the book twice, because I hope that once you get to the end and you go, oh, okay, that's who done it, then you'll feel, I hope, compelled to start again, maybe more quickly, skimming, but go back and read it again and say, okay, that's why that made sense there. That's who that was talking about. That's what they meant when they took that step or this step, or left out this step and left out that piece of information. So yes, it's important to me, just as a writer, as a writing process, to know where I'm going. I don't know every last step. Sometimes the characters can lead me through some of the steps. Vandy's struggle with whether or not to use a firearm is something that I worked on, and I treaded backwards and forwards on how I was going to deal with that. It was important to me that, again, breaking those tropes, that she not be a pistol packing detective, that she has made a vow to not use a gun, although she's quite adept at it and she keeps up her skills, but she's very conscious of wanting not to do that. She's not a drinker, another trope I wanted to challenge and throw out. She's not an alcoholic. She's not a drinker. And so I wanted to, she's got her set of weaknesses, but those are not among them. So having chosen those limitations on her ability, I'm always challenged to say, okay, she can't necessarily shoot her way out of every dilemma because she doesn't carry a gun. So how do I do this? How do I get her in and out of violence? Because it's part of the life that she leads. There is violence in a way that is realistic to the limitations and the opportunities I've set up for her. So I found that a fun challenge. But to answer your basic question, yes, I knew from the beginning who was responsible.
Check out Death of an Ex. You will love it. Looking forward to the third one. Delia, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Jessica, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
So once again, this was Jessica with Syosset Libraries Turn the Page podcast. Our guest was Delia Pitts, author of the Vandy Myrick series. Check out Death of an Ex. Check out Trouble in Q-Town.
Queenstown, yeah.
And also check out your is it the Ross Detective Agency you said?
Yes,
yeah, check
exactly.
those out as well. And we are going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.